The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. My name is Dr. Owen Campbell. I'm the owner of Simplify Motion Physical Therapy in Phoenix, Arizona. And with me, as always, is Dr. Brian Wolf, owner of Evolution Physical Therapy in Connecticut and Long Island. How are we doing today, Brian?
I'm good, man. How are you? Now the pipes are all warmed up. You know what I mean? So now hopefully we sound better. I like to think that we do.
Well, I'll tell you, on video, your lighting is much better.
I have a light. I have a thing now. Like it's actually shooting me in the face with
a circle light. Do you have a circle light?
I do. It's actually working really nicely. So I'm glad. I'm actually really pumped that you commented on that. I'm not gonna lie to you, because they're the first person. when you think about good lighting, I never realized the importance of it until I started shooting bad content, and then realized, okay, it's much better to have good content. So
yeah, I have the Phoenix sun coming in, so the light really helps. But
we do not get that here in the Northeast.
I think it's just yeah, I know.
Doom and gloom.
It's weird if we don't have it. So one day I think it was overcast and I looked like I was inside a cave.
That makes sense. Is it fun? Yeah. It's like you're from upstate New York. You know the way that works.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's miserable. Move down here, man. Come on.
Exactly.
No offense to our upstate New York listeners. We love you.
Yes.
So today, again, we're going to go over another cool question that we got, and it stems off of something that we did in the school classroom of hiring. So a friend of mine is he's coming through, and he's basically saying, okay, I'm busy. People know me. I'm at a point now that there's business I'm leaving on the table because I don't have enough people. So he used his contacts, he leveraged his, social networks, his wife's social networks, all that stuff. And he finally came up and worked with somebody who's apparently awesome. He was really, really happy she's on board. Right. And one of the comments that he said to me was, I gotta make sure I work on my onboarding. Right. And this person is, I want to say they're in the Seattle area. So if you know anybody in Seattle who's looking for a job, this one's closed, but hopefully if he keeps growing, he's going to really keep going. But this individual, his biggest thing was, well, crap, now I got to onboard this person. Right. And I think that's something that some cash pay or new solopreneurs, or even if you're a new grad coming out, you likely don't have this experience of the managerial aspect. If you've managed a clinic before, you kind of know the onboarding process at least a little bit, but there's a lot of other questions that, you kind of need to know that may be different in a busy insurance clinic or a hospital-based system that might be offloaded by HR. I used to work at one place where HR did all of that. And then they just said, make sure they don't break anybody. So I guess one of the questions I think that I want to pose to you, and, I can chime in too, is what's a really good top 4 or 5 principles that you would really want to hit when you're trying to onboard that first employee? They accept their offer letter. Now what?
It's a really, really good point, and one that I was getting wrong initially, right? I think one of the things that I think would be really good is to develop a process, number one, right? And realize that the process probably is going to be the worst in the first employee, right? And so you're hoping, and honestly, I would set that employee up for that. Be like, listen, you're my first person I'm onboarding, so this might be a little herky jerky, right? At first, that's not intentional. So being very transparent, I think, is good, right? And then 3 is when you've developed that system, is developing a really organized approach, so the person can understand and don't feel like they've just been tossed to the wolves. I think another aspect of it is understand that it's your process, not the employee's process, which means that this is my process that I do for employees. So a lot of times because I think what happens for solopreneurs in this scenario is they're like, oh my God, I got so busy now that now I need to onboard that person because I'm leaving money on the table, but I can't really take the time to not see patients. And
Mhm.
so what I need to do is just like quickly onboard them for an hour here and there, and then they're like good to go, right?
Yep.
And that's tough, man. It's like I don't I understand. I think the one advantage to onboarding for a smaller clinic with cash based, you don't have that recoil effect of like if I have it like for me for insurance, like insurance isn't going to pay me for that person's visits for 60 to 90 days. So
Yeah.
that first 60 to 90 days, I'm taking that bad boy on the chin, right? For their
Mhm.
salary. Cause I'm gonna that's what, 4 payrolls minimum. So
Yeah.
like, so I'm not getting paid anything. So once we get paid, the nice thing is with cash, you're getting paid hopefully right away.
Mhm.
So the aspect for then on the last episode, we just talked about how this is the other advantage to collecting for the entire plan of care. So you collect for the entire plan of care, then in theory you can collect for the entire plan of care, and you can then cut your employee their payments as they're going. So you really want to take the time to orient them. And I think that you can get away with organization if you come up with like we started doing this at Evolution, and it really did help me because and this is something that I pulled from the Evolution guys. So I got to give my partner Mike and obviously your friend a lot of credit on this. He was the one who was like for the first 2 weeks, come up with an orientation schedule. Every single new person that we hire on as a PT has a schedule that they
Mhm.
like. Here's where they're going to be on Monday. Here's who they're going to meet with. Here's who they're going to be on Tuesday. Here's who they're going to meet with. Here's who they're going to be Wednesday, and so on and so forth. And
Mhm.
what's great about that is now you can think about it, if I put 1 or 2 meetings on a PT schedule for 10 days, essentially I've got, you know, give or take 10 to 15 hours worth of stuff on there that we're going to orient them through and they know what to expect. You're going to go
Mhm.
meet with this person. You're going to go to this high school. You're going to go talk with that PT. You're going to talk with that authorization person. You're going to meet with this, with this front desk person, this regional person, right? So, obviously, what you can also do is put in, hey, you're going to meet with me once the beginning of the day, once the end of the day, every single day for the next 10 days.
Yeah. I
That's the
think
orientation.
I think the biggest thing really is that it should be malleable to the situation,
Yes.
but within the structure that you just identified. So if you have someone who is a seasoned clinician who just came from another outpatient orthopedic practice that likes you better because you met at a networking thing and you don't really have too much of a concern about them treating patients, that's a very different onboarding process than maybe a newer graduate, right? Or somebody who came from a place that is a mill, right? And they are going to be treating your patients in a very different way than your patients are used to. So the clinical piece has to really drive the bus, right? But you also have to make sure that there's structure to it. Now, you can be hopefully, you're strategic in making sure that your meetings aren't useless time, right? And that's the thing that I would always get worried about in big box PT when we were orienting a new manager or if we were orienting a new staff member is that they're just going to sit there and be like, uh huh, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, right? And then they'll forget all of that information because they haven't practiced it, they haven't used it, they haven't called the person who you should call, who you tell them to call when this happens. And then 3 months down the road, it's like they didn't even sit through those 2 weeks where you were paying them to not see people. Right.
Yeah.
So I think you have to make sure that it's structured, but over a long enough period of time that like real world learning can happen and that you tailor that. You obviously someone who's seasoned, you would expect real world learning to happen quicker because they've had professional jobs before, all the way down to someone who's newer where it doesn't mean you have to take more time with them, right? Maybe more shadowing time, so they can see the clinical side, but you may want to stretch those periods out a little bit longer so that they have touch points farther along where they might be embarrassed to ask you a question, right? How embarrassed are you to ask a question when you've been in a job for 4 months? What's that saying? Like, I don't know, and now I'm just too afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Like that is a real thing, especially in a professional setting when you're a newer graduate. So you got to make sure that you're building in times even 6 months down the road, right? That they
I,
can do this. Yeah.
I think one of the things that you just mentioned that is really good, and that popped into my head when you first asked this question, was realize that the same reason, particularly if you're a cash based practice, or even honestly, I would say this even for insurance based practice, the same reason for why somebody left their their job to come work for you, it's not necessarily that you're going to break it in the first 2 weeks on that orientation schedule, but it sets you up for success, right? So every single person needs to be like taken care of and feel like they're comfortable in their environment, and they're feeling heard, and they're excited about what they're doing, and they're appreciated, and what they have the ability to move in the direction they want to move. Like they have all these different things they want to have, right? And
Mhm.
so to your point, I think that a lot of it is, hey, like, if somebody we just hired a physical therapist who just started yesterday, right? And their thing was like, look, I want to shadow for the first 2 days and see no patients. And the manager we had there obliged, was like, yep, no problem. And in my head, I was like, well, like they can see one or two new patients, because the problem is on our onboarding system, the way we do it, it's actually delay our onboarding process 3 days, because we need, to do documentation, we need to see some patients that we can actually prep them through some of that, like see
Mhm.
tests, right? So the problem is there's not really anything going on there. So it's like to have a structured scenario. And then the reason that person got caught was because they did not caught, like, and we're like, yep, no problem, was because they didn't understand the structure well enough. So like
Mhm.
this is something you want to establish now, because for me, and that's not me, right? There's the accountability side of it, is like I should have taught that structure, but like, hey, this is what you should do. And then this way, then they can do this, and then you can show them this, and that will get better over time. Um, and that's something that you can do with that, right? Is like this way we can actually do this process together, where ultimately you want to set every employee up for success. So I think when you're
Mhm.
building a lot of structure and putting in some structured face time, it can do a really good job. And you can change stuff around. Like I do that all the time. I have to, right? I have to change certain things just so they can make, it has to be fluid. So ultimately you want to make sure that you're doing, everything that's right by your employees and why they came on to work with you.
Mhm.
But you also want to make sure that that you've got the structure so that they're like, oh, cool, this is just how it goes there. Right. And it's
Yeah.
like, cool, that's perfect.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece there is you're almost you're almost kind of interviewing, right? Like this is their first interaction with how you do business. And yeah, the interview is that, but once they've signed the offer letter, now they're not in the position of they can choose five different people and you have to suck up to me. But at the same point, they are still in that this is a first impression, right? The first date, that first whatever. We talk about it when we're bringing in a new patient. Hi, how are you today? Greet them by their first name. That really matters psychologically. There's a lot of studies on first impression being the most important. So, this is really your first impression. So, to make sure, like you said, hey, if that was messed up, fine. I'll talk to the manager afterwards. This person had a good first 3 days. They got exactly what they wanted out of it. Yeah, we lost maybe 6 or 7 visits that we otherwise could have reimbursed for or held billing until they're credentialed or whatever it is. But don't sit there and say, okay, we screwed everything up. Let's go do this again. Like all this stuff. You're like, cool. Like, great. Hope you had a great experience. Now I want you to see a patient so that we can figure out this day one of onboarding or day four. Right. So there's a lot of back and forth malleability in these, but keeping within that structure is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think the aspect of why that structure is that important is because it sets the tone for what the rest of the relationship's going to be, right?
Yeah.
So you're developing, just like we talked about developing trust amongst customers, you're also developing trust amongst your PT. And
Hmm.
so I think if you're trying to do that and grow with somebody, you want to make sure you're taking your time and create and say take them through the process of what they should do. And then it also just shows that you've, like, I love this orientation schedule because it just shows that you've planned for the person, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
take that long. They're like, oh, cool,
Oh,
they're planning for me coming, right? And like that matters, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff is
I could
important when you're doing
I
this
could
stuff.
tell you some horror stories, man, of like corporate PT
Ooh,
when we've
tell
onboarded
one.
people.
Tell one. Tell one. I want to hear
Well,
one. I want to, tell
we had
tell what not to do, Owen. That's good.
we had one manager that didn't even know the employee was starting that day. The employee showed up and was like, "Yeah, hi. Okay, so like let's go." And the manager's like, "Do you have an appointment?" That was the first word out of the mouth because it was, "Do you have an appointment?" And again, you talk about ball dropping, right? Like the regional didn't talk to the manager to say, "I've brought this person on. I've made this decision. Now, the manager happened to have been sick during the interview process, and it was a competitive process. So there was back and forth on it. On the, there was a conversation, but it was over the phone. So the manager had no idea what this person looked like, right? So they got the dates wrong. So they are sitting there like, okay. And honestly, I think that person left within a year, right? And I think that first impression was a big step backwards, right? Because when you think about it, we're with an insurance based competitive market, reimbursement rates are going down. We have to find different ways to stay relevant and profitable when everything else is going up. It's already not going to be raindrops and butterflies and all the other stuff that any new grad or job changer hopes. And when you start them there, then they're looking at the process of like, are you guys even a real company? Right? Is this even like a thing? And I remember that specific employee, I was at a happy hour function or something like that, and you could definitely tell that person was not no, was nowhere near as on board with the mission of the company as anyone else, and it was just all first impression. Now, also we kind of found out with that manager that there was some other things kind of going on that didn't make it so that there was the most professional appearance of the company to this new employee, and we had to go through a lot of training and mentorship on the back end with that particular manager, because they were just so green, right? There was their first management position. We had to make sure that they understood it. But I mean, this person literally, they would reference it almost every time, like as a joke, right? And it even got to the point that other people wanted to know about it, which is great because now not only do you screw up with one, you screwed up with like four others. So like that's a horror story on that level. And then the other horror story is we had a company where we're supposed to have a mentor to get through like all the clinical stuff for all the new hires. The regional didn't check in with that mentor for 6 months. That was 6 months of hires that person was not making that initial contact saying, we are going to mentor you clinically. So on performance reviews the next year, we found out, oh crap, no one's been like doing our clinical mentorship piece in Arizona. You know, and why are all these people leaving? And like one of the number one things on exit interviews was the mentorship was garbage. And you're just like, oh, wait a second, what? So that oversight on a bigger level is important. But on a smaller level, if you're that manager, you're that owner, and you're not doing that and you promise it, I mean, good luck.
I mean, to your point about that first one, right? That first one, like imagine hiring somebody and like this is the good news about your friend, right? Like this is the bar that's been set in medicine to a degree,
Mm,
right? Do you have an appointment? Who are you? Right?
yeah,
That's one of those things. And then the joke permeates. So it's like the person it's like, hey, I like just I'm really sorry. I did that happened. Like and then because there's so many levels to that, right? Like
yeah,
this PT's excited. They're starting a new job. They're awesome. That they just quit their other job, so they just quit
yeah.
something to come here, and then that's the first thing out of the gate. It's like, oh
Oh,
shit,
oh, and we tried to damage control. Like that's the
yeah,
thing is
that's the
I said,
problem.
I am so sorry. Would you please my like but I mean, how are you going to tell somebody to not bring up a joke at a happy hour? Right?
Yeah,
Like they think they're one of the guys, one of the girls, and they're just like, oh yeah, just like that one time. And you're just like, hey, we talked about this in a side conversation. Like, could you please not
yes,
bring that up? No, like they're gonna make fun of it, right?
no,
So
exactly,
you only got
exactly,
one shot.
and that's the thing. Like, to your point, so to your point is it sets the whole thing up moving
Hmm.
forward to make sure that like the person's actually going to be doing what they need to do and like being on board with the company mission, and so you can lose people really quick like that, which is a
Yeah.
problem.
And
So
that's a
that's the
horror
issue.
that's an obvious glaring horror story, but now let's change that mistake to I forgot to tell them how to expect their paychecks. Or
Yeah,
let's change that to like
yeah,
I forgot to tell them who to talk to when they're covering the local football team,
yeah.
right?
So
So
now
it
what happens is
might not be as much of a joke, but still
So
not great.
now what happens is if you don't even know that I'm coming, how do I know that my paycheck's gonna be on time? How do I know that like
Mhm.
anything that I'm doing, how do I know that my liability insurance is in place? How do like this is what happens with employees. Employees worry about all the things that like is this to your point about is this a real company? Like
Mhm.
do they have my back? Like they start
Yeah.
to lose trust in the company. And so that's the problem ultimately that
Well,
goes on.
and I think the final piece of advice I would give my friend is that you are new, right? They will see that. I mean, you put on social that they're your first employee. Everyone knows that, right? The company was you all the way up until they showed up. So if you come in and just say, look, I'm going to do my best to do the most possible stuff I can to make it right the first time. But I may not get this right. Please call me at any point of the day or night. Wake me up. I don't care. My first priority is to make sure that you get paid, that everything I tell you becomes true. And if it isn't, I want to know. Right.
Yeah.
And having that very frank conversation for the first time. And then once you get up to your level where you've done it, you know, 50, 60, 100 times, whatever,
Yeah.
then you don't really have that conversation because the expectation is you know what you're doing. Right.
Yeah.
But so there is a continuum of like that conversation you have to have as well.
And that's what I found was a naturally attracting talent
Hmm.
as a solo act was that if other people didn't trust me. I remember when one person was like, "Well, like, do you have like 401k set up and do you have like payroll set up?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm like a legitimate company. I don't know what." But I remember thinking I was like later. Now I look back on that and I'm like, "Oh, they just didn't like trust that I had all this
Hmm.
stuff squared away." And it's like, okay, man, I get that. I can understand that. Like, if you're
Yeah.
small, that's what you're fighting against, right? When you
Yeah.
have multiple employees and a bigger company, it attracts more people because it seems like it's more of a trustworthy type of place, right?
Yeah.
And then ironically, the people that want to ultimately leave is they want to leave those big companies because they lose trust in it because of the lack there of personality around it. So,
Yeah.
again, just kind of to wrap this up, what we're talking about is I think having more structure and organization and taking your time to really onboard people the right way, even though you're probably insanely busy, is so important. And then create this structure that you're going to carry on for if you have 50 employees, because
Yep.
ultimately that's going to allow you to have, the structure is going to be to your point, like clockwork. It's just easier to do and you can do it in your sleep. So it makes it much simpler.
And this is going to be one of the things that we put up in the school classroom under our hiring module. So we started the hiring module with onboarding, well, at least putting out an offer, right? Setting yourself up to attract talent before you actually need the talent. Then how to make sure that, people know that you have an opening and how to make sure that you close that person, quote unquote, on being an employee. And then this will be something we're going to add here probably in the next week or so on the onboarding process. So if you want access to on demand, at your fingertips videos of how to do this stuff, I very much encourage you to join our school classroom. It's the Physios Growth Mentorship. It will be in the show notes, either on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify. So, Brian, with that, do you have anything to add before we close out?
No, I mean, I think to your point, this and also our school community, you have access to me and Owen to ask these Q&A questions, which is when we brought up in just a 20-minute podcast on. So if please like give us these questions because they're great for us to think about topics of what you guys want to listen to.
Yeah, the last two podcasts have been formatted as this Q&A. Now we won't spend 20 minutes answering your question, I promise you.
Maybe more
But
succinct.
we will be more succinct
Exactly.
because we don't have to set up everything. We can just answer directly to you and based on your thing. So that's the value of the Q&A sessions. But yes, these are set up to kind of give you a picture and what sort of advice and mentorship you will get. So with that, Brian, I am out, my friend. I got a patient to run to. Hope you're having a good one, baby.
Sounds good, man. Later.
See ya.